1973, the average American drawing a private company pension received about $177 a month. 6 years later, that same group was drawing about $220. The companies had raised them by 24%, and no law on the books required them to raise anything. And by 1979, those larger checks bought roughly a quarter less than the smaller ones had. So this is not a story about a broken promise. It is a story about a promise that was kept and still could not keep up. Now open a household budget kept by a family in 1974 and read down the left margin. Rent, groceries, gasoline, doctor, Christmas. Every one of them is there in pencil with a number beside it. There's no row-marked retirement, not blank, not crossed out. It was never a row at all, and the family was not being careless. That pension promise was doing the job on somebody else's page. This is the decade it came off that page and landed on theirs. Here is the shape of the move. In 1980, about 38% of private wage and salary workers in America were participating in a traditional pension, the kind where an employer promises a monthly amount for life. That figure is from the Social Security Bulletin. Today, reading the Bureau of Labor Statistics National Compensation Survey, 14% of private industry workers are offered such a plan, and about 9% are actually in one. The households living through it had exactly one thing that kept up. From 1975 onward, Social Security benefits rose automatically with prices. The first of those automatic raises was 8%. For a great many retired families, that raise was the only part of the monthly income that moved at all, and they leaned on it. Remember which part. So the question is narrow, and it has an answer. If that row was not on the family's page in 1974, whose page was it on? And what happened to it there that sent it back to the family, in the family's own handwriting, inside of 10 years? Look at what occupied the row, because the arrangement is genuinely strange once you hold it still. A traditional pension, what the law calls a defined benefit plan, is not a savings account. Nothing accumulates in an account with your name on it. What you have is a promise. Work here long enough, reach a certain age, and the company will pay you a stated amount every month until you die. The money behind it sits in a fund the company controls, and the obligation sits on the company's balance sheet, which is why the family did not need the row. For most households, the only piece of retirement appearing anywhere in their own accounts was a payroll deduction on the pay stub, the Social Security tax, 5.85% of the first $13,200 earned in 1974. And that is a tax, not a savings line. A Bureau of Labor Statistics study of pension plans that same year found that more than one participant in 10 was required to contribute toward the cost of his own plan, usually 1, 2, or 3% of pay. For everyone else, nothing. A family looking at its own page and writing nothing under retirement was not being ignorant. It was reading the arrangement correctly. And a promise, unlike a balance, is worth exactly whatever stands behind it. The 1970s is the decade that found out what stood behind it, and the answer arrived in two parts. The first had already come 11 years earlier in Indiana. In December of 1963, the Studebaker plant in South Bend, Indiana, built its last American car, and the company terminated the pension plan covering its hourly workers. The fullest account is James Wooten's history of the episode in the Buffalo Law Review, and his numbers are worth taking one tier at a time. The plan covered roughly 10,500 workers. About 3,600 had already retired, and they received their full benefits. Roughly 4,000 were still on the job, aged 40 to 59, average age 52, average 23 years of service. They received about 15 cents on the dollar of what they had been promised. The remaining 2,900, all with fewer than 10 years of service, received nothing at all. Sit with the middle tier. 23 years on average. Every one of those men had done the only thing the arrangement asked of them, which was to stay, and they had paid that price in full in years. What they learned in 1963 is that the promise had no collateral. It was not a fund with their names on it. It was a company's intention, and a company can stop existing. And here is what the memory of this period leaves out. Most retired workers of that generation never had such a promise to lose. The Social Security Administration's own retirement history study found that in 1974, among fully retired Americans, 28% received any income from a private pension at all. Not a majority, barely more than a quarter. That is how substantial the thing in South Bend was, and how narrow. Studebaker was also the loud version of something quiet happening in companies that never closed. Before 1974, no federal rule required that years of work turn into a benefit anyone could keep. That same Bureau of Labor Statistics study found about 1 participant in 8 was in a plan with no vesting provision whatsoever. You were owed a pension only if you were still on the payroll at 65. Among plans that did vest, 53% of workers needed a minimum of 15 years, and many provisions did not apply at all until a worker reached a stated age, frequently 40 or 45, and the credit was fragile. In manufacturing, 74% of participants hit an immediate break in service if they quit, and 62% forfeited on discharge. None of this was fraud. All of it was legal, and it was written into plan documents in plain language almost nobody read because the promise sounded like a promise. Congress took 11 years to answer Studebaker. Senator Jacob Javits of New York introduced the first pension reform bill in 1967, and 8 more years went into investigations and hearings. On September 2, 1974, Labor Day, President Gerald Ford signed the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, Public Law 93-406. Everyone now calls it ERISA. Signing it, Ford said the men and women of the labor force would have much more clearly defined rights to pension funds and greater assurances that retirement dollars would be there when they were needed. The law did 3 things, and the cleanest way to read them is against South Bend. It set vesting rules, capping cliff vesting at 10 years so that reaching a stated number of years earned a benefit no closure could take back. The 52-year-old with 23 years in would have kept his. It set funding rules, so a company could no longer promise a pension it was not putting money aside for. The fund that came up short would have had to be filled while the plant still ran. And it created the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, a federal insurer that pays the promised benefit up to a statutory limit when an insured plan fails. That backstop did not exist in 1963. Everyone in an insured private plan afterward had all 3, so the crack that opened in South Bend was sealed. Every account of this decade ends there, with the law fixing the thing the plant closing broke, and every one of them stops 1 crack short. The second one ran the other way, and no vesting rule in the world reaches it. Return to those 2 numbers from the beginning, because the arithmetic underneath them is the whole decade. Writing in the Bureau of Labor Statistics Monthly Labor Review, 3 economists tracked a sample of more than 130,000 people already drawing private pensions between 1973 and 1979. The average benefit rose from about $177 a month to about $220. 3/4 of those retirees received at least 1 increase. Nothing was owed to them. The companies raised the checks because the companies chose to. Now set that against the Consumer Price Index, kept by the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the index, where 1982 equals 100. It stood at about 44.4 in 1973. By 1979, it had reached about 72.6. Prices rose 63%, while the pensions rose 24%. The raises came to roughly 2/5 of what the cost of living did. So, A retiree opened an envelope in 1973 and found $177. 6 years later, he opened a bigger one, $220, and it bought about what $134 had bought the first time. He had received a raise every couple of years and lost roughly a quarter of his standard of living. And the study ran the counterfactual. Had the companies granted no increases at all, the loss would have been closer to 39%. That is the measure of the effort. It was real, it was voluntary, and it covered 2/5 of the problem. There is a second finding in that study which I think is the sharpest thing in it. Only about 22% of pension plans granted any increase at all. The reason those two figures point in opposite directions is size. Among plans with fewer than 100 people drawing benefits, 17% gave an increase. Among plans with more than 10,000, every single one did. So whether inflation reached a particular kitchen table in 1978 depended less on the law or the economy than on how large your former employer happened to be. The government measured the same erosion from the other end. Gail Thompson, writing in the Social Security Bulletin in November of 1978, examined private pensions of retirees from 1970 to 1974 and found the median benefit rose about 9% in nominal terms while losing 14% of its purchasing power. Over the same span, the real median Social Security benefit rose 26%. Her conclusion was that Social Security increases had helped compensate for what the private benefits lost. That divergence is the quiet center of the decade, and it is the part that gets left out. In 1972, Congress amended the Social Security Act to make benefit increases automatic and tied to the Consumer Price Index, effective from June of 1975. From that year forward, the government's retirement promise moved when prices moved. The employer's promise moved only when an employer decided it should. So by 1978, a typical retired couple had 2 retirement incomes on the kitchen table, one indexed by statute, one indexed by Goodwill. Same inflation. Only one of them had been built to survive it. Employers were reading the same numbers from the other side of that table. ERISA had just made a pension something you must fund, insure, report, and legally guarantee. Inflation was making every existing promise more expensive to keep and more expensive still for any company choosing to help its retirees. In one decade, a pension had become a long-dated obligation of unknown size in an economy where nobody could forecast prices 4 years out. Which brings us to a provision almost nobody noticed. In the Revenue Act of 1978, Congress added a short section to the Internal Revenue Code, Section 401, subsection K, effective for plan years beginning after December of 1979. On its face, it did something modest. It let an employee defer part of his own pay before tax into an account. A benefits consultant named Ted Benna is generally credited with seeing what that section could be made into. Working for the Johnson Companies, he designed a plan funded from the employee's own salary before tax, with the employer adding a match, and it went live on the 1st of January 1981. That November, the Internal Revenue Service issued proposed rules permitting contributions by salary reduction, and the thing left the page and entered the payroll system. By 1983, according to the Investment Company Institute, nearly half of all large American firms either offered such a plan or were considering one. The row that did not exist in 1974 exists now. It is called a 401k, and you know roughly what is in yours. Read the 2 arrangements side by side, and the migration is complete. The old one put the obligation on the company's books, and nothing on the family's page. The new one puts an account on the family's page, funded from the family's income, carrying its risk, in its handwriting. This is the point where a video like this usually starts telling you what to do about it, and I am not going to. I think the honest reading is narrower and more useful than advice. The 1974 household was not thriftier or wiser than a household today. It lived inside a different architecture, one that asked it to stay in a job rather than to fund an account, and it read that architecture correctly. What the decade tested was which promises in that architecture could survive a moving dollar. The one indexed by Statute survived. The one indexed by Goodwill did not, even where the Goodwill was genuine, and the households holding it absorbed the difference in the only place a household ever absorbs anything, which is in what it stopped buying. So the row on your page today is not a sign that anyone got better at planning. It is the visible residue of a promise that stopped being made. 38% of private workers were in that promise in 1980. About 9% are now. Somebody used to keep those figures on another page, in another building, in a fund you never saw, and to raise them sometimes when prices ran. Now they are on your page, in your column, and the number in it is one nobody else has undertaken to hold still. If your family kept books in those years, look for the retirement row. In most of them, it is not there. The rest of this decade is on the channel, one budget at a time.